What is China doing? Is China dropping bombs? Is China occupying Iraq? Is China trying to destabilize Afghanistan, right? Did it just replace the United States? Is it the new colonial power? Is it the next uh, big power, big imperialist power that we need to worry about in this region? Is it going to cause devastation equivalent to, or maybe even in excess of, the United States and its allies? Not exactly. So let's look at what China recently announced just in Iraq alone, okay? Because I think this just tells the story, right? Because it would be quite ridiculous to think that China is going to bomb Iraq when actually it's about to build 1,000 schools in Iraq. So here is the South China Morning Post announced this all the way back. Oh, look at that advertisement. Okay. Um, Announced this all the way back in December of 2021. Uh, it announced that it signs a deal to build 1,000 schools in Iraq as Beijing pushes for greater role in the Middle East after U.S. withdrawals. So China is going to build schools, and there were more recent reports about how they're starting to do that now because that deal was signed more than nearly 8 months ago. Now the building is starting to happen. And so, oh, it looks like there's a paywall here, and I'm not going to read the article, but there you have it. China has, I could get through the paywall, but we don't have time to read all of the articles that I have up. I just want to show you that there's 15 contracts on Thursday with the Power Construction Corporation of China and Sinotech. By the way, those companies are state-owned companies, so that's who's going to be operating and building these schools. So it's a major destination, right? And it makes sense for China because Iraq has all of these resources, and China can provide infrastructure development to help out Iraq, which has been devastated by the US war there. I mean, do you remember Fallujah? What happened in 2004 in Fallujah? The United States leveled nearly all of the bombs and did so with depleted uranium. Used depleted uranium, and now people have cancer rates that are well in excess to the rest of the world, and did not do anything to help rebuild the infrastructure there. Left Iraq, left Fallujah to die, and now China is stepping in and saying, "We'll build schools for you, more than 1,000." And so Tucker Carlson doesn't mention that, and I think that that's pretty disingenuous. That's pretty suspicious, and I would say that's downright hypocritical. But we shouldn't, I mean, I would never expect Tucker Carlson to even do basic research into something that's so simple because there's a political agenda afoot with his coverage about China. But even just that basic premise that China is now un, you know, now participating in the development of 1,000 schools in Iraq shows the hypocrisy of anyone who says that China will be more cruel than the United States when the United States hasn't stepped in anywhere and said, we're going to build schools instead of bombs. You've seen the USAID, you've seen US financial dominated international financial institutions, so-called aid programs and all of that say, yeah, we'll build schools and we'll give you vaccines, but they only do it under the auspices of an intense debt regime, an IMF-led, World Bank-led debt regime, which actually plunders public wealth, destroys and privatizes public wealth. And then what you get are these minuscule, menial infrastructure projects, which ultimately don't help these countries develop, ultimately don't raise the standard of living, doesn't help with the public health situation and the education situation in countries like Iraq, in countries all over the African continent and Asia, etc. Actually, what it does is just more firmly implants US and Western finance capitalism and imperialism into those countries. So, sure, while you may have uh, philanthropists, all privately backed for the most part, go into other countries and say, yeah, we're going to build XYZ. They never do. You saw what happened with Haiti's earthquake. You even saw what in Hurricane Katrina. The United States didn't even rebuild the lower Ninth Ward because guess what? The lower Ninth Ward is a black neighborhood. They didn't even rebuild that. So they don't even rebuild in the United States, in their own so-called colonies, in oppressed communities. They don't do that. That's what we have here, this intense hypocrisy. This is what the American exceptionalism conceals. this actually abhorrent record. So while the United States is killing 500,000 plus people in Iraq and Afghanistan, has that record alone since 2001, China's building schools, China's building infrastructure. And that's a theme that we are going to highlight a lot in this stream. So another thing uh, I want to just highlight is that China also I always love this about pundits like Tucker Carlson or anyone. The Financial Times does this a lot. There's a lot of outlets that kind of have this panic about China's ascendancy. They say, "Oh my gosh, China's gonna." You even saw with the FBI and the MI5, which I covered in a stream not too I covered in a stream before the last one, where I talked about how now the MI5 and the FBI have teamed up and said that China is now the biggest threat to their economies, right? That they're stealing all of this intellectual property, that they're hacking and cyber hacking and blah, blah, all this stuff, all these claims that they're stealing everything, they're competing unfairly, they're going to put your business out. And I said, well, US businesses, and more specifically, US monopolies and corporations, are responsible for all of this poverty. I mean, you know the situation right now. Look at what's happening. We have a minimum wage that's still $7.25 in most places federally, and then I mean, we know that some places pay less than that. Um, we don't have a quote unquote $15 hour minimum wage anywhere except for a few places locally. And you've had wage stagnation, you've had wealth just dry up for the vast majority of people, and you have one of two people in or near poverty, and 80% of people living paycheck to paycheck in the United States. So you have a lot of poverty. You see it. If you live anywhere in the United States, you see the homelessness, you see the absolute depravity, the super exploitation. You see people sleeping on the streets. You see people in the shelters. You see the immense suffering that people are going through, the extreme stress. You may be watching this and be one of these people who have to work multiple jobs just to live and make basic needs, right? You may have medical debt, you may have student debt, right? And I don't want to go on some Bernie Sanders style rant, but the point here is that there's millions of people in the United States living in extreme poverty. I've worked with people who don't make more than $600 per month. I've worked with people like that who are in that economic situation, and then we tell them to go get housing, and then we tell them to go meet their food needs. Then we tell them to meet their transportation needs. Then we tell them to meet all sorts of other needs, right? To pay certain bills, utility bills, and all this. It's impossible in most places. Actually, in all places, it's impossible because we know how much it costs just to rent anywhere in the United States. No one who's making $600 a month is able to meet their basic needs. One in two people make less than $30,000 per year. I mean, that is absolutely just criminal. But yet China is the country that we should be worried about. And I always say this, I always find it hilarious when they're talking about China is going to undermine US corporations, US businesses. China is going to be is not like us. They're cruel. And I say, well, maybe I want that cruelty. Maybe I want US corporations to be undermined because perhaps we can address something like this. Perhaps we can also have a zero poverty marker. Maybe we can also meet a zero poverty marker of our own volition and meet it 1 month before deadline, like China did in November of 2020. I wonder what was happening in November of 2020. Oh, right. A pandemic was happening. It was just starting. We were 8 months or so for China. They were more so 11 months into what has been a deadly pandemic that has been absolutely catastrophic to social and economic life, but China still eliminated extreme poverty. China was once the most extreme, the most one of the most poorest countries with the highest rates of extreme poverty in the world, and then each year since 2012 had 98 million or so people in extreme poverty. Each year reduced it with a targeted poverty alleviation program. Doesn't mean that people in China are rich, especially even those who got out of extreme poverty, because we're talking about something like in China, I think the number is a couple bucks an hour, higher than the World Bank standard. But also, China adds in the important things, the two assurances and the three guarantees, which are food, clothing, healthcare, housing, and education, into what it means to experience extreme poverty and get out of it. So I don't want to hear all the, oh, extreme poverty, it's not a big deal. It's a big deal to meet those two assurances and three guarantees and increase people's income. That's a big deal to me. That's a huge deal, especially when I think about, and I've met people, I went to China, I met people who are rural workers who still work on collective farms or their own private farms. It's a big deal to be able to meet that marker. And that's what China has done. The United States has not done that. The United States has an economy that's still roughly 5 to 6 times in per capita income. I mean, per capita GDP, sorry, and per capita GDP larger than China, yet still has millions of people living in extreme poverty, catching hookworm and all these diseases, not able to meet basic needs, sleeping on the streets. I mean, China doesn't have that. China met that mark. China met that challenge within its own context. So maybe I want it. Call me crazy. But if I see a country that has that goal and then meets it ahead of time and also does it during a pandemic, I want to sip what they're sipping. I want to understand what they're doing. I don't see that as cruel at all. So you see the dynamic here. Tucker Carlson is trying to uh, inculcate and ingratiate into the minds of Americans. He's trying to tell them that you should be scared while not saying what exactly you should be scared of. And I'm saying, well, if we're scared of poverty alleviation, then we're in big trouble because we're not going to have any kind of class struggle in the United States if we're scared of that. So those are just 2 points: the infrastructure instead of bombs, and then the poverty alleviation instead of, well, all of the poverty that we have in the United States with no poverty alleviation program. Haven't heard it. You barely hear it out of the mouths of US politicians. Sorry. You saw it. They were saying poverty sort of during the election and then the Build Back Better plan. And then that was shelved, right, by Democratic Party intransigence, so-called divisions, really political games. So that was shelved. And then what happened? Well, the American Rescue Plan or whatever that was, it expired. And then so the child poverty that was reduced, right? You had this 8 million, I think, right? I think it was around roughly 8 million children lifted out. Well, they're right back in. And now there's inflation. So they're right back in, and their families, these children and their families, are suffering more now. So there's no poverty alleviation program in the United States. I've worked for anti-poverty agencies. I know. I know what it's like not to have any poverty alleviation plan. I worked for agencies that were outgrowths of the war on poverty, the so-called Great Society, war on poverty, during the Johnson administration, and then there was funding that was doled out after that as well. So I've worked in organizations like that, and I can say quite clearly that there is no poverty alleviation program in the United States. There's a poverty maintenance program. So if you're poor and you need to not die, you might get a little bit of utility assistance. You may or may not get some SNAP, right? So you don't die. You get a couple bucks a day on SNAP, so you don't die. Maybe, but you might die anyway. The cops might kill you like they did Jalen Walker. You might just get sick and not be able to afford it without insurance. You may just be a black woman in the United States, right? My wife just dealt with this. She works as a nurse in a postpartum. You may be a black woman who's homeless, who's pregnant. And the doctors may just say, yeah, let's give you a C-section and kill you, because they don't care about your pain. They don't care about your pain at all. They don't care about your situation. They're just like slice and dice and get them out because they are eating money. They aren't paying. right? People who are homeless and poor, they don't really pay for those beds. They're like, get them out as soon as possible. And people die because of it, especially black people. A lot of black people die because of the racism and the economic exploitation that goes on in the hospital system, in the medical healthcare, so-called healthcare system. So what's cruel exactly? China? Or is it really the United States that's cruel? I don't know. You can be the judge of that. I think you get where I'm going.